Hello and welcome to the channel today. I'm Will and I'm going to be talking about my classics TBR. Many of these are determined by books that are compulsory for me to read at university. Some are those that I might be looking into a dissertation for, and some are some classic fantasy reads which I somehow have not read yet. And as perhaps mainly a fantasy booktuber with the Brothers Gwyn and the books that I read on here as well, I could have my license revoked for not having read them as of yet. There is some Arthurian Legend coming up as well. I love the Arthurian Legend, and yet I somehow have not read the book that I'll be talking about later, which is just wrong. So I think I've got 9 here. I didn't make it to 10. I just thought these are the ones I definitely really want to read, probably in 2025. We'll see how that kind of prophecy goes throughout the year. We'll see how many I've read by December. Hopefully all of them, but we shall see. First up, a book I've been talking about quite a bit lately is Dracula by Bram Stoker. I watched Robert Eggers' new film Nosferatu and then also Francis Ford Coppola's version of Dracula for the first time in the last month, and so I'm in a vampire mood. And Dracula, probably the place to go when you're in a vampire mood, isn't it? Especially when it is one of Papa Gwyn's favourite books of all time. I've had this all in the epistolary form, which I find very interesting. I love a gothic tale, and what a pleasure it would be to read it from this leather-bound edition. Dracula, I love the idea of kind of the immortality, but is it a blessing or a curse? And I imagine the answer is going to be more of a curse. And I love the kind of horror aspect about it, but it's not just relying on horror. At least that's what I've heard about this read and this story. It's what Papa Gwyn loves so much about it. And yeah, it's one of those that I've been intending to read for so long. I don't know why. There are just some books that always get pushed down the pile, but they're always on there. And for me, Dracula is one of those. So hopefully I can finally push myself to pick it up and tick it off of the list. And so that is Dracula, that is Bram Stoker, and that is the first book that I am talking about today. And on to the next, I've got something which is part of my Victorian literature module at university, and it is Middlemarch by George Eliot. Many of my lecturers have been saying that this is perhaps the greatest, or seen at least as the greatest of the Victorian works. And so that is high praise indeed. So far, some have been hits, some have been a miss for me on the course. I loved North and South, didn't click as much of David Copperfield. I know that's sacrilege, I'm sorry, but hopefully we're back on track with Middlemarch. I don't really know anything else about it. I try to always temper my expectations with these reads because I imagine I will really appreciate and respect it, and I have for almost every book on this module. But appreciating doesn't always translate to enjoying, and so we'll see which category or both that Middlemarch hopefully falls into, and that is the next classic, and the first one dictated by university. And I should have mentioned for Dracula, another reason I'm going to be reading it is that it's Gothic near the end of the Victorian period, late 19th century, and yeah, it might fit into some background knowledge and wider reading for my Victorian literature module and give me a bit more of a different direction of literature at the time. And then next up, I've got some classic fantasy. And this is one that I read the first one by Papa Gwyn as a child, but I need to read that again and the rest. It is the Chronicles of Narnia, beginning with The Magician's Nephew. I loved the films as a child, and I loved the first book. I don't know why I didn't carry on, but I really, really need to. You don't really hear too many people talk about it today. Maybe it's just the smaller circle of BookTube we interact with, but I really want to pick Narnia up. And yeah, there's not much more to say beside that. That is the first installment of the traditional classic fantasy that is on this list. And getting on to the next one. It's not outright fantasy, but it is fantastical. It is The Once and Future King by T.H. White. This is the Arthurian Legend I was talking about. I believe there's 5 novellas basically in here. That's why it looks quite chunky, but it's 5 different stories. And one of them becomes the title. It is The Once and Future King. T.H. White is known as for this seminal work, really, as having shaped a lot of the perspectives on Arthurian legend in the 20th century and as we see them now. Of course, there are so many different retellings that people often locate one, but they don't realise why they fall into that legend or that belief. And T.H. White is one of the most influential authors in that work, in that field. And The Once and Future King inspired the Disney film The Sword and the Stone, I believe. Or maybe that's one of the stories in here is The Sword and the Stone. But I know one of them one of these stories inspired the film. And so he's had an influence on adaptations as well. And I think this is the newest release that I've got on this video. I think it came out in 1958. And so over 75 years ago. And so that's kind of my ballpark for classic. It's an ambiguous term. It could mean 30 years ago. I've gone for around 75 years ago. Or longer, of course, because there are quite a few books written in the 60s and 70s and 80s I really want to read, but I wouldn't quite call them classic in the term that I'm taking today. Although it's not wrong to do that. But if I did it, I probably would have had 20 books today. So a way of minimising the list, I took it at 75 years. And this is the most recent release, or maybe the last of the Narnia books is, but I think the first one came out in 1950. And so that goes to my list as well. And also I meant 60, not 75. Yeah, The Once and Future King. There we go. And then next up, I have got Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. This is another read dictated by uni. It's part of the Victorian Literature module. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading it. It's a bit smaller, so it's nice to read alongside the Titanic books that could be assault weapons. Because David Copperfield, about 800 pages. I'm going to be reading Charles Darwin's Origin of Species and texts like that, which are pretty chunky and pretty hefty and could be used for workouts. This is a nice look in the other direction, but of course I'm also looking forward to finding out the root of one of the most famous kind of children's stories out there, but one that you can get a lot from as an adult as well. Really like this edition, and I'm looking forward to diving in. This is probably the one on the list that I'll be reading first, because I'll be reading it in the next 2 months. I might be reading it next week or at some point over the next 6 weeks. We shall see where it falls into the schedule, but it will 100% be finished by the end of February, and you can keep me to that. And then I have got The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy. So this is a novella, again, a bit of a shorter one for me to read on this list. And it is a story that I want to read because I loved a film called Living, which came out a few years ago. That was inspired by an Akira Kurosawa film, and that adaptation was inspired by The Death of Ivan Ilyich. I believe it is about a man who finds out he is terminally ill and he's not got long left to live. He is a man who has lived to work and he hasn't worked to live, and he's flipped those around for the wrong reasons, and now in his final period of life he tries to get the most out of it. I've said in other videos, I love the Dead Poets Society. I love the saying, Carpe Diem. I mean, that says it all, doesn't it? A lot of people know me as Carpe Diem. They bought me a ring. I've been bought that. Lots of things to do with that saying, seize the day. And The Death of Ivan Ilyich seems to be a story that exudes that idea, but also the struggle to do so, because life can often be a struggle. And so I think it's a story that speaks a lot about the human condition, but in a way that isn't too overwhelming, and also gives us a story and doesn't just detract from it with the philosophical outtakes. And so there we go. That is The Death of Ivan Ilyich. And then next up, I've got Frankenstein, another Gothic tale, one I cannot believe I have not read as well. Of course, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, one that has had many adaptations, but I don't know if there's a certain one that people love more than others. I think there might be one or two coming out in 2025 and 2026. I think there's one directed by Maggie Gyllenhaal that might be about Frankenstein making Frankenstein's wife. I don't know, something like that. But there'll be quite a few adaptations upcoming. It's a story that has fascinated people. Man playing God. That is the main theme of Frankenstein. And I imagine punishment going along with it. Of course, I know kind of the overall message and story of Frankenstein, but I actually have never found out how it ends. And so I think that's quite impressive as someone, especially as I study English and history, that I've never overheard how it ends. And so that won't be spoiled for me. And I'm looking forward to picking up Frankenstein. And that might be the most famous on this list. Although I talk about fame, next up is Animal Farm by George Orwell. I also really want to read this. Again, it's one of those that apparently strikes a very good line between having a broader message and, of course, relates very closely to the political landscape of the time. But also it tells its own story and it doesn't get overwhelmed with its didactic messages to the people reading it. And I think that's a fine line to strike. And apparently Animal Farm did a very good job of doing that. But of course, it's a book that needs no introduction, so I won't go into talking about everything that it's about when I don't even know too much as well. And I need to read it and probably come back and do a review. And then last up, I have got The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. I have no idea what I'm going to pick as my topic for my dissertation, but Hemingway seems to be one of the options for me. So I'll be reading The Sun Also Rises and potentially A Farewell to Arms as well. If I really enjoy and find a great analysis of The Sun Also Rises fascinating, I'll pick A Farewell to Arms up, but I'm not officially putting it on this list because it depends how this read goes. And so yeah, The Sun Also Rises, really looking forward to reading it. It's Hemingway's first novel, I believe. I think he might have done some other works first, but as a novel, The Sun Also Rises is the first of his catalogue. I adored A Farewell to Arms, and I also loved The Old Man and the Sea. I think he's a fantastic writer with the right priorities. And again, he's someone who I think just really speaks to the human condition from what I've read so far anyway, in a way that isn't pretentious, in a way that really resonates with me today. And doesn't go too far. So let's hope I can continue that streak with Hemingway going and enjoy The Sun Also Rises. So there we go. That is the list. I think that's 9 books. They are my classics TBR pile. And so at uni, I've been reading a lot more classics. There's some I haven't gelled with, others I've really clicked with. And hopefully these fall into the latter category of loving them all. That would be lovely, wouldn't it? But yeah, these are quite a broad range from kind of fantasy classics, Arthurian Legend, to those like Hemingway, and then some gothic mix as well with Frankenstein and Dracula. And then children's as well, with Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. That's what I do love. When people say classics, you have no idea what they mean until they specify what book. It could be the Iliad or it could be Jane Eyre. There's a huge range, of course, and I'm looking forward to diving into these. But everyone, thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these, what some of your favourite classics are, and if you'd like any more content on classics on the channel, please let me know. But everyone, thank you so much for watching, and Carpe Diem.